The National Cabinet, this is the Prime Minister and the State and Territory leaders are meeting as we speak right now. This is trying to alleviate the fuel crisis we're seeing as a result of this lingering war in the Middle East. Joining me live now is the Shadow Energy and Emissions Reduction Minister Dan Tehan. Dan, good to see you. What's first and foremost here? What is at the government's disposal practically that they can dispatch quickly?
Well, what we need to see come out of this National Cabinet is the appointment of a fuel czar so that he can do the job that Chris Bowen has so obviously failed to do. And what the fuel czar will need to concentrate on are these things. First of all, where are the supply gaps? And then how are we going to go about putting a plan in place to fill them? What are we going to do about fertiliser? Because it is going to become the next big issue, and for our food security we need fertiliser and we need it at an affordable price. We also need to know where are the gaps in the imports. We know that now contracts aren't being honoured when it comes to the importing of fuel into Australia, so what are we doing to fill those gaps? And of course we need to know about the ACCC legislation. The government made a big song and dance about that when Parliament last sat. Well, is that legislation ready to go first thing Monday morning? Will they brief the opposition on that legislation so we can make sure it'll actually do the job that it's meant to do, and so that we can get it through the Parliament swiftly next week? So they're the sorts of issues that this fuel czar is going to do. Sadly, Chris Bowen has failed at his job, and I think, having two jobs, one...
Australia is running low on petrol. Diesel pumps are going dry across the country, and the Prime Minister's solution is to hand the keys of the Fuel Supply Taskforce to someone whose entire career has been built around taxing fossil fuels. That is not a punchline. That is the actual policy decision Anthony Albanese made this week. You genuinely could not write this stuff, and yet here we are, watching it unfold in real time. If this is the kind of story you want covered without the spin, hit that subscribe button and ring the notifications bell. The Australian mind is watching, so you do not have to do it alone. Now, before we get into who exactly Albanese has appointed, let us set the scene. The coalition had a very specific request. Shadow Energy Minister Dan Tehan went on Sky News and said in plain English that Australia needs someone with serious logistics credentials to steer through this crisis. He name-dropped Lieutenant General John Frewen, the man who coordinated Australia's entire COVID vaccine rollout, as the calibre of appointment the moment demands. Someone who can cut through bureaucratic tape, bang heads in state and federal departments, and actually get fuel moving. A no-nonsense operator, a logistics general for a logistics emergency. Anthony Albanese heard all of that and appointed Anthea Harris. Let us talk about Anthea Harris, because her resume is genuinely fascinating, just not in the way you want when the country has 36 days of fuel supply sitting in the tank. Harris served as the inaugural chair of the Climate Change Authority. She has spent the better part of 2 decades as one of Australia's most prolific architects of carbon pricing policy. Left-wing outlet Crikey once described her as arguably more involved in pricing carbon pollution than any other person in Australia. That is quite the title to bring to a fuel supply emergency. Her career in climate and energy stretches back to the early 2000s, when she reviewed New South Wales' Greenhouse Benchmark Scheme. She then helped design an emissions trading model for states and territories, caught the attention of the Commonwealth, and landed senior roles within the Department of Climate Change under Kevin Rudd. As Assistant Secretary in the Emissions Trading Branch, she was a key architect of Rudd's Carbon Pollution Reduction Scheme, the policy that eventually morphed into Julia Gillard's Carbon Price Mechanism, or as most Australians called it, the carbon tax, the very policy that defined a decade of political warfare in this country. She later became CEO of the Australian Energy Regulator, where she made clear that Australia's national energy objectives now explicitly include emissions reduction. She has also been a central driver behind what critics describe as the government's capacity mechanism scheme, essentially an emissions trading scheme dressed in different clothes. This is the person now in charge of making sure Australia has enough petrol and diesel to function. Here's the analogy that writes itself. Imagine your house has a burst water pipe flooding the kitchen. You call a plumber, but instead of a plumber showing up, you get someone whose entire career has been spent arguing that people use too much water and proposing schemes to make water more expensive. Technically still in the industry, technically still knows what a pipe is, but perhaps not the person you want on the floor with a wrench when the clock is ticking. And the clock is absolutely ticking. Australia's minimum stock obligations currently sit at 36 days of supply, less than half the international standard. The country has 2 oil refineries. The fuel storage network that once serviced major towns across the nation has been quietly wound back over years of regulatory neglect. This is a genuine national security issue, and the coalition's point was that it demands a national security-style response. What it got instead was the appointment of someone whose professional identity is inseparable from the view that fossil fuel production needs to be constrained, taxed, and ultimately replaced. Whether you agree with that view on the merits is a separate conversation entirely. The timing, however, is extraordinary. Tehan said it directly. Australia does not want another Canberra bureaucrat doing this job. What Australia got was arguably the most Canberra appointment imaginable, someone who has spent 20 years inside the machinery of climate policy, now tasked with securing the very fuel supplies that machinery was designed to reduce. The government will tell you she has deep energy sector experience, and technically that is true. The question Australians are asking is whether that experience points in the right direction for this particular moment. That is a question worth sitting with. Thanks for watching. We genuinely